He thought he had finally caught a break. After years of grinding work, sleepless nights, and endless bills piling up on the kitchen table, Marcus Hale believed fortune had finally smiled on him. Nearly $100,000 in lottery winnings. To a man living paycheck to paycheck, that wasn't just money. It was salvation. A chance to breathe. A chance to start over. But what Marcus didn't know was that the very woman he trusted the most, his wife, Evelyn, was already plotting against him. Behind her smiles, behind her tears of so-called joy, she was scheming. Scheming with another man. Whispering about a new life, one where Marcus no longer existed. Can you imagine the betrayal? The person you love, the one you share your home, your bed, your future with, secretly planning your death the very moment you think life is finally turning around? It's chilling. It's unthinkable. This isn't just a story about murder. It's about greed, about lies, about how love can twist into something monstrous when poisoned by desperation and desire. Tonight, we dive into the tragic case of Marcus Hale, a hardworking bus driver whose lottery win should have been the key to a brighter future. Instead, it became the price on his head. A prize not of luck, but of death. Stay with me, because what happened next will leave you furious, heartbroken, and utterly shocked. Marcus Hale was not a man of luxury. He wasn't the kind of person you'd ever see on magazine covers, or walking through life with ease and privilege. No, Marcus was a working man, the kind of man who built his life around responsibility, around duty, around doing whatever it took to make ends meet. At just 33 years old, Marcus had already spent more than a decade behind the wheel of a bus. Day after day, he guided passengers across long stretches of highway, from Detroit to Lansing, from Flint to Chicago. The job was grueling. Long hours, overnight motel stays, endless miles rolling beneath his tires. Yet, Marcus kept going. Why? Because that paycheck, modest as it was, kept the lights on. It paid for food. It kept a roof over their heads. His home was a small rented duplex on the east side of Detroit, a working-class neighborhood near Chandler Park. It wasn't much, but to Marcus it was home. The walls may have been thin, the paint may have chipped, but he never complained. He believed in living within his means, in working hard for what little he had. But behind his calm, stoic exterior, life was weighing heavily on him. Debt had become a relentless shadow. Credit card balances piled high, late notices stacked on the counter, and the car loan fell months behind. He worked himself ragged, yet it felt like no matter how hard he tried, he was always one step behind. And he wasn't shy about it either. Friends and family remembered how Marcus would sometimes sigh heavily, shaking his head as he muttered, "I'm on the road more than I'm at home, and still, what do we have to show for it?" His frustration was real, and it was growing. Yet, Marcus wasn't a bitter man. Far from it. He clung to hope, even when things looked bleak. He had this quiet determination, a belief that if he just kept going, kept grinding, maybe one day things would finally turn around. He was the kind of man who'd give his last dollar to someone in need, even when he didn't have enough for himself. And in his marriage, Marcus believed he had a partner. He had been with Evelyn since 2011, more than 7 years by then. To the outside world, they were just another couple making it work. They had no children, but Marcus often spoke about wanting a family someday. He thought of Evelyn as his anchor, the one person he could count on when the weight of the world grew too heavy. But what Marcus didn't realize was that Evelyn's heart was already drifting. While he was out on the road, working late into the night to pay down their debts, Evelyn's eyes, and her desires, had turned elsewhere. Still, Marcus remained committed. Even with mounting financial pressure, even with the endless hours away from home, he dreamed of a future that might be better. He imagined paying off the debts, buying a small house of their own, and maybe, finally, cutting back on the endless bus routes so he could spend more time at home. For Marcus, life had been an uphill climb, but he wasn't defeated. He wasn't ready to give up. And that's what makes what happened to him so heartbreaking. Because Marcus Hale was not a reckless man. He was not careless or selfish. He was simply a good man, trying to build a decent life from the limited cards he had been dealt. A man who had no idea that his greatest enemy wasn't the bills or the long hours, or even the debt collectors pounding at the door. His greatest enemy was living right beside him, sleeping next to him, smiling at him, and planning his downfall. On the surface, Evelyn Hale looked like the picture of an ordinary wife. At 32 years old, she worked as a front desk supervisor at a boutique fashion store inside a bustling shopping mall in Dearborn, Michigan. Day after day, she greeted customers with polite smiles, managed her team of clerks, and handled complaints with rehearsed charm. To anyone watching, Evelyn seemed like a hard-working woman just trying to support her household. But behind that polished exterior, Evelyn was restless, dissatisfied. She felt trapped in the life she shared with Marcus. The small duplex, the endless bills, the modest lifestyle, none of it was enough for her. She craved more. More excitement, more comfort, more power. And when life didn't hand it to her, Evelyn began looking for another way. It was at that boutique where temptation arrived in the form of Darren Cross, a 36-year-old mall security officer. Darren was tall, sociable, and carried himself with a confidence that drew people in. But beneath the surface, he was just as unstable as Evelyn. Divorced, reckless with money, constantly drowning in his own debts, Darren was no hero. Yet, to Evelyn, he represented an escape. Their connection began innocently enough. Casual conversations in the mall hallways, playful banter between shifts. But soon, those exchanges grew longer and more intimate. Before long, Evelyn and Darren were texting late at night, sneaking off to meet in secret, and eventually, Evelyn began spending nights away from home. To Marcus, she explained it away with excuses about late closing shifts at work. But in reality, she was wrapped in Darren's arms while her husband sat alone in their duplex, exhausted from another week on the road. And this wasn't just a fling. No, their affair quickly deepened into something darker. Messages later uncovered from Darren's phone revealed the whispers of a future together. Starting fresh. Cutting ties. Leaving the past behind. These weren't just the words of lovers. They were the seeds of conspiracy. Can you imagine? While Marcus struggled to hold his life together, Evelyn was already imagining a new one without him. Not just without him, but at his expense. Those who knew Evelyn at the time described her as charming but calculating. She knew how to present herself, how to say the right words, how to mask her true intentions. And that's exactly what she did with Marcus. When he called her from the road, weary but hopeful, she'd reassure him. When he came home with shoulders slumped from fatigue, she'd smile, offer comfort, and pretend to stand by his side. But it was all a facade. Every word, every gesture, a mask. Because Evelyn wasn't planning to build a future with Marcus. She was planning to steal it. With Darren by her side, Evelyn began to see possibilities. He became her confidant, her partner in secrecy. Together, they whispered about debts, about freedom, about how much easier life could be if Marcus wasn't standing in their way. And Marcus? He had no idea. To him, Evelyn was still his wife, his partner, his anchor. But in truth, she had already chosen another man. She had already chosen betrayal. It's hard not to feel outrage at this point. Marcus gave everything he could, his time, his sweat, his sacrifices, and what did he get in return? Lies, deception, and a wife who, instead of supporting him through hardship, decided to turn her back and plan his downfall. What Marcus couldn't see, what he could never have imagined, was that Evelyn's hunger for more wasn't just a crack in their marriage. It was a fire, and soon, it would consume him entirely. At first, it might have seemed like just another workplace fling. Evelyn Hale and Darren Cross sneaking around, sharing stolen kisses, sending each other late-night texts filled with promises and fantasies. But this was no ordinary affair. Theirs was built not on love, but on desperation, and desperation can be dangerous. Darren, for all his outward charm, was a man spiraling financially. Divorced, reckless, living in a cramped apartment, and barely making ends meet as a mall security guard. He owed money, borrowed constantly, and never seemed to learn his lesson. He complained to anyone who would listen about being broke. To Evelyn, he was an open book, vulnerable, malleable, and easy to manipulate. And Evelyn? Well, she had her own motives. She was tired of scraping by, tired of watching Marcus exhaust himself day after day, only for their life to remain the same. But instead of seeing Marcus's sacrifice for what it truly was, devotion, responsibility, love, she twisted it into resentment. She convinced herself she deserved better, and Darren became the vehicle for her escape. The whispers between them grew darker. What started as talk of running away turned into complaints about Marcus. Darren would joke about how Marcus was in the way, how things would be easier if he just disappeared. And Evelyn didn't recoil. She didn't stop him. Instead, she leaned in. Digital records later uncovered revealed the chilling evolution of their conversations. Evelyn messaged Darren, "He'll never share it with me." "Not really. He'll always keep control." Darren responded, "Then maybe we need to take control ourselves." They began to map out possibilities. How could they rid themselves of Marcus without raising suspicion? How could Evelyn walk away free, with the money in her hands, and Darren by her side? At first, Darren hesitated. Murder wasn't something he'd ever imagined being part of. But Evelyn knew exactly how to pull him in. She painted Marcus as an obstacle, as a man who'd never let her go, never give her what she wanted. She whispered about the life they could have together, debt-free, happy, starting fresh. And slowly, Darren's doubts eroded under her influence. Together, they hatched a plan. It wouldn't be a spur-of-the-moment act, but a carefully orchestrated crime. Evelyn researched sedatives. How much was needed to incapacitate a grown man? She even convinced a co-worker to help her acquire a blister pack of sleeping pills from Canada, claiming she struggled with insomnia. In reality, every tablet was a weapon. The plan was as cold as it was calculated. Evelyn would drug Marcus, rendering him helpless. Darren would arrive under the cover of night, help restrain him, and together they would dispose of his body. They believed, in their arrogance, that if Marcus's disappearance looked voluntary, if it seemed like he had packed up and run off with the money, no one would ever suspect them. It's almost unbearable to imagine. While Marcus was talking to his sister about using his savings for a house, while he dreamed of stability after years of struggle, Evelyn was already planning his death. She wasn't thinking about love or partnership. She was thinking about cash, about freedom, about Darren. And Darren, blinded by desire and debt, played along. Surveillance later placed him near Evelyn's home late at night, his dark pickup truck parked discreetly nearby. He was the shadow lurking just blocks away, waiting for the signal to move. By late August 2018, their plan was in place. Evelyn had the sedatives. Darren had the means to transport a body. And Marcus? Marcus had no idea the people closest to him were preparing to end his life. They thought they were clever. They thought they could outsmart the police, outmaneuver suspicion, and walk away with Marcus's hard-earned winnings. But what they didn't know was that their so-called perfect plan would soon unravel, and the price of their greed would be far greater than they ever imagined. For Marcus Hale, the lottery wasn't just a game. It was a quiet ritual, a small spark of hope he allowed himself every week. 4 or 5 times a month, at gas stations and convenience stores along his bus routes, he would slide a few worn dollar bills across the counter and walk away with tickets tucked in his pocket. He didn't expect miracles, but deep down, he always held on to that whisper. Maybe this week will be different. On August 10, 2018, during a stopover in Saginaw, Marcus followed that same ritual. He pulled into a Speedway gas station, bought 4 Powerball tickets, and carried on with his night. To him, it was routine, another long evening, another modest gamble. He never could have known that this time, fate had actually answered. Later that night, tucked away in his motel room after finishing his shift, Marcus sat down to check the numbers. One by one, they lined up. His heart began to race. Could it be? When the last number appeared, Marcus realized the truth. He had matched 5 out of 6 numbers. He had just won $99,800. Can you imagine that moment? After years of scraping by, after endless miles on the road, after all the frustration and exhaustion, suddenly, here was nearly $100,000 his. Relief, disbelief, joy all crashing over him at once. For Marcus, this wasn't just a win. It was a lifeline. At 9:37 p.m., Marcus picked up his phone and called Evelyn. The call logs later confirmed it. On the other end, she answered, and he delivered the news with pure excitement. According to investigators, Evelyn's reaction was almost theatrical. Gasps, laughter, tears of joy. She told him their struggles were finally over, urged him to come home so they could plan their future together. But behind that display of happiness, Evelyn was already calculating, already thinking of what this money could mean for her and Darren. The next day, Marcus returned to Detroit early. He showed Evelyn the official claim confirmation from the Michigan lottery. Witnesses would later recall how she clapped her hands, hugged him tightly, and cried as if their prayers had been answered. To Marcus, it was the beginning of a fresh start. To Evelyn, it was confirmation of opportunity. On August 12th, the couple drove together to Lansing to claim the prize. At the lottery office, Marcus was offered two options: structured payments over time or a lump sum immediately. Marcus hesitated, uncertain, but Evelyn didn't. She pressed him hard, insisting they take the lump sum right away. She spoke of banks, delays, complications, all excuses. What she really wanted was quick access to cash. Marcus agreed. Within 48 hours, a cashier's check arrived. And just like that, the Hales were no longer drowning in debt. Marcus wasted no time. He paid off 2 credit cards totaling over $14,000. He cleared the overdue balance on his car loan. He began mapping out the future with fresh optimism. Maybe we can buy a small house, he told his sister Shalanda. Maybe I can cut back on work, spend more time at home. For the first time in years, Marcus felt light, hopeful, free. He even withdrew around $40,000 in cash, placing it carefully into envelopes inside a small metal lockbox at their duplex. To him, this was security. To Evelyn, it was temptation sitting right under her nose. And here lies the cruelest irony. Marcus believed the lottery had saved him. He believed the universe had finally granted him the chance to reset his life, to build stability, to enjoy a little peace. He saw the money as a gift. But for Evelyn, that money wasn't salvation. It was motive, fuel for betrayal. The very thing Marcus thought would heal their struggles became the spark that lit the fire of his destruction. It's heartbreaking. The poor man thought he had finally won. In reality, the moment those numbers lined up on his ticket, his fate was sealed. Because Evelyn had already decided, if Marcus wouldn't give her the money freely, she would take it, no matter the cost. August 26, 2018. A quiet Sunday evening inside the modest duplex on Nottingham Road. For Marcus Hale, it was one of the few nights he wasn't on the road. He had spent the weekend running routes for Indian trails, but now, finally, he was home. Home in his pajamas, settling onto the couch with his wife. The television flickered softly. It was an ordinary night, the kind of night Marcus cherished because it was rare. But for Evelyn, it was the night she had been waiting for. The night she would turn her husband's sanctuary into his tomb. Marcus poured himself a whiskey, unwinding after days behind the wheel. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that Evelyn had already crushed a handful of sedatives into the glass. As he took that first sip, he tasted nothing unusual. How could he? The bitterness had been masked. Slowly, sip by sip, his body began to betray him. By 11:30 p.m., Marcus was fading. His head heavy, his speech slurred, his limbs slack. Evelyn watched carefully. This was the moment she had prepared for. She didn't comfort him. She didn't reach for a blanket or ask if he was okay. Instead, she waited until her husband was unconscious in his pajamas and t-shirt, completely helpless. At 12:15 a.m., headlights cut across a nearby street. Darren Cross had arrived in his dark Ford F-150, parking just far enough away to avoid suspicion. The plan was unfolding with sickening precision. He slipped inside the duplex, the silence of the night broken only by the sound of zip ties tightening around Marcus's wrists and ankles. Can you picture it? Marcus, the man who had just days before paid off debts, who was dreaming of buying a home, now lying bound and unconscious, betrayed in the cruelest way possible, not by strangers, but by his own wife and her lover. They wrapped him in a bed sheet, transforming the man Evelyn once vowed to cherish into nothing more than a problem to be disposed of. Surveillance cameras from nearby homes later captured a grainy figure, consistent with Darren's build, staggering under the weight of a heavy bundle. That bundle was Marcus. Together, Evelyn and Darren carried him out into the night, toward the waiting truck. They laid him in the bed of the pickup, his body hidden beneath darkness. Then, without hesitation, they drove off, heading north toward Genesee County. The drive must have been chilling. The roads were empty, the world asleep, while inside that truck sat two people who had just crossed an irreversible line. To them, Marcus wasn't a husband or a friend, not even a human being. He was an obstacle, a wallet, a pile of cash locked inside a box. And they had convinced themselves that by getting rid of him, they were claiming their freedom. Around 3 a.m., they reached Stanley Road Bridge, which stretched across the dark, still waters of Holloway Reservoir. There, under the cover of night, Evelyn and Darren pulled Marcus's unconscious body from the truck. His wrists and ankles still bound, his body still weak from the sedatives. And then, in an act as cold as it was heartless, they pushed him over the guardrail. Marcus plunged into the water, sinking quickly into the blackness. His phone, his wallet, his watch, all tossed in after him, as if erasing his identity could erase the truth. Think about the cruelty of it. Marcus wasn't awake to fight. He wasn't conscious to scream. He had no chance to defend himself. His life was stolen not in a moment of rage, not in some tragic accident, but in a carefully scripted betrayal. When it was over, Evelyn and Darren climbed back into the truck and drove south, the night swallowing the evidence of their crime. By 5 a.m., license plate scanners confirmed the Ford F-150 was already heading back toward Detroit. Evelyn returned home, showered, packed a suitcase, and sent her landlord a message saying she would be away for a while. And just like that, she attempted to erase Marcus from existence. This was no crime of passion. This was premeditated, calculated. A cold-blooded conspiracy executed by the two people Marcus should have been able to trust the least, yet the ones he trusted the most. The saddest part? While Marcus dreamed of using his winnings to buy a home, to create a stable future, Evelyn's only dream was to live that future without him. And on that August night, she made sure that dream became her reality at the cost of her husband's life. The Holloway Reservoir stretched out under the night sky, dark and silent, its waters still and merciless. At 3 a.m., it became the grave of a man who deserved anything but this fate. Marcus Hale never saw it coming. He never knew the betrayal that had been brewing in whispered conversations, in secret messages, in stolen glances between his wife and her lover. Drugged, bound, and unconscious, he couldn't fight, couldn't cry for help. He was carried like cargo, stripped of his dignity, and pushed into the cold black waters by the very people he trusted most. And just like that, Marcus was gone. Imagine the horror: bound wrists, ankles cinched tight with plastic ties, sedatives coursing through his bloodstream, dragging him deeper into helplessness. He didn't thrash, didn't resist, because he couldn't. His final moments were silent, invisible to the world, swallowed whole by the reservoir. The water closed over him, erasing all sound, all light, all hope. Above him, the surface rippled briefly, then stilled. Back on the bridge, Evelyn and Darren stood for only a moment before turning away. No tears, no hesitation, no shred of remorse. To them, Marcus wasn't a man. He was an obstacle that had finally been removed. They tossed his phone, his watch, his wallet into the water after him, as if scattering tokens to ensure he vanished without a trace. And then they walked away, climbed into the truck, and drove southbound as if nothing had happened. The callousness of it is unbearable. Marcus's body sank into the depths while his killers discussed their next steps, their voices calm, their minds already moving on to money, to escape, to their so-called new life together. By dawn, Evelyn returned home. She showered, packed a suitcase, and even messaged her landlord that she would be gone for a bit. Gone, as if she hadn't just erased her husband from existence hours earlier. To the outside world, everything appeared normal. A quiet house, a folded bus uniform in the laundry basket, a jacket still hanging by the door. But in reality, Marcus's life had been stolen, his body left beneath the reservoir's waters, while Evelyn carried on with her charade. It's a chilling thought, isn't it? That someone could take your life so quietly, so ruthlessly, and then step right back into the world as if nothing had changed. That the woman Marcus had married, trusted, and loved could turn her back and simply walk away. The reservoir became his coffin, a cold, unmarked grave chosen not out of rage or desperation, but out of greed, all for less than $100,000. And the saddest part of all, Marcus had believed, with every fiber of his being, that the lottery win was his turning point, that this money would free him, would buy him a little peace after years of struggle. Instead, it bought him betrayal. Instead, it paid for his death. 2 days passed, and with Marcus gone, Evelyn Hale began weaving her story. She picked up the phone and called Marcus's sister, Sheila. Her voice shook as she cried into the receiver. She claimed Marcus had left her without explanation, that he had packed a bag, taken the money, and disappeared. Evelyn sobbed. insisting he must have met another woman, that he had abandoned her. But Sheila didn't buy it. Not for a second. She had spoken to Marcus only days earlier. He'd been filled with hope, excited about paying off debts, and finally looking toward the future. He had told her he was planning to put part of the winnings toward buying a small house. Why would he just run away? Sheila thought. Why would he leave after everything was finally looking up? The lie didn't sit right. And Evelyn's performance, the dramatic crying, the rehearsed excuses, only deepened her suspicions. Over the next 2 days, Sheila tried calling her brother's phone again and again. Each attempt went straight to voicemail. Silence. Dread gnawed at her. Something wasn't right. On August 29th, unable to take it any longer, Sheila drove to Marcus's duplex. She stood outside, knocking for nearly 20 minutes. No answer. The house was eerily quiet. Finally, Sheila contacted Detroit police and requested a welfare check. When officers entered the duplex, they immediately noticed things didn't add up. Marcus's work jacket still hung by the door. His bus company uniform sat neatly folded in the laundry hamper. On the bed lay a half-packed suitcase, shirts, socks, toiletries, as if someone had been preparing for a trip but never left. Inside the nightstand, they found Marcus's phone, powered off. But his wallet and keys were missing. The apartment wasn't ransacked, wasn't robbed. Everything was just a little too tidy. Staged. To detectives, it didn't look like a man who had walked away from his life. It looked like a man who had vanished. And suddenly, Evelyn's story of abandonment began to crumble. When Detroit police launched their investigation into Marcus Hale's disappearance, they didn't buy Evelyn's story. Too many things didn't make sense. Marcus wasn't the type of man to walk away, especially not after finally catching a financial break. And the so-called evidence that Evelyn pointed to, the missing wallet, the packed suitcase, felt staged, as if someone had carefully laid a trail of breadcrumbs to suggest he had left of his own free will. Detectives decided to follow the money. They contacted the Michigan Lottery Commission, which confirmed Marcus had claimed $99,800 on August 12th. Records showed the winnings were issued via cashier's check, deposited into Marcus's account, and then, within days, the account was closed. Bank statements revealed the truth of what Marcus had done with the money. 2 credit cards paid off in full. A car loan cleared. But then, a troubling discovery. Nearly $40,000 in cash had been withdrawn, with Evelyn present at the bank. Surveillance footage captured them both smiling, standing side by side as Marcus carried envelopes of money. That money, the last tangible trace of Marcus's dreams, had vanished. Detectives tried contacting Evelyn, but her phone was off. When they checked her residence, it was empty. Neighbors reported seeing her leaving days earlier with suitcases. She hadn't just lost a husband, she had abandoned her life. And then came another red flag. Evelyn's employer, the boutique fashion store, reported a theft. Over $7,000 had disappeared from the store safe on the very same day Evelyn stopped showing up for work. Security footage told the rest. Evelyn, after hours, walking into the store and leaving with a large tote bag. The pieces were falling into place. Evelyn wasn't just unlucky in love. She was on the run. But who was she with? Coworkers gave detectives the missing link. Evelyn had grown unusually close to a mall security guard named Darren Cross. He hadn't reported for work in 4 days. His truck, a dark Ford F-150, was suddenly nowhere to be seen. Investigators issued a "Be on the lookout" alert for Darren's vehicle and began combing license plate recognition systems. At the same time, they dug deeper into Evelyn's digital life. And what they found was damning. Text messages between Evelyn and Darren painted a sinister picture. In the days before Marcus disappeared, Evelyn had written things like, "He'll never share the money, and we have to move fast." She even outlined instructions that she had the sedatives that Darren should park 2 blocks away on the night of the plan. The detectives' suspicions hardened into certainty. Evelyn and Darren hadn't just run away together. They had conspired. They had planned Marcus's disappearance down to the smallest detail. The search intensified. Surveillance systems across Michigan were tapped, checking highways, toll booths, and traffic cameras. And soon, the data revealed another chilling clue. Darren's truck had been detected traveling southbound on I-75 into Ohio on August 28th, 2 days after Marcus was last seen. They hadn't just fled the scene. They had fled the state. The investigation was no longer just about a missing man. It was about a murder conspiracy. Detectives knew it. The evidence screamed it. And yet, one piece was still missing: Marcus himself. Until then, all they had was suspicion, texts, and money trails. But soon, Holloway Reservoir would give up its secret, and the horror of what Evelyn and Darren had done would be undeniable. August 31st, 2018. Two fishermen were casting their lines along the quiet shoreline of Holloway Reservoir when they spotted something floating in the water. At first, it looked like debris, a bundle caught in the current. But as the men drew closer, the horrifying truth emerged. It was a body. Authorities rushed to the scene, securing the area as deputies pulled the remains from the water. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. The victim was dressed in pajama pants and a t-shirt. His wrists and ankles still bore deep contusions, marks left by plastic zip ties. Dental records later confirmed what detectives already feared. It was Marcus Hale. The autopsy told the rest of the story. Sedatives, zolpidem, were found in his system, enough to leave him incapacitated, unable to resist. His lungs were filled with water. The cause of death: drowning. But this was no accident. He hadn't stumbled. He hadn't fallen. He had been pushed into the reservoir, drugged and bound, left to die without a chance to fight back. Imagine the cruelty of it. A man who had finally cleared his debts, finally allowed himself to dream again, ended not in peace but in the cold, black depths of a reservoir. His life stolen, not by fate, but by the greed of those he trusted most. Detectives no longer had doubts. This wasn't a disappearance. This wasn't abandonment. It was murder, deliberate, calculated, and merciless. And now, with Marcus's body recovered, the manhunt for Evelyn and Darren shifted into overdrive. They thought they had erased him. They thought the reservoir would keep their secret forever. But Marcus's body rose back to the surface, and with it, the truth. With Marcus's body recovered, the case shifted from suspicion to certainty. There was no more doubt. He hadn't left voluntarily. He hadn't run off with the money. He had been murdered, betrayed by the two people closest to him. Investigators wasted no time. License plate recognition data confirmed Darren Cross's Ford F-150 had crossed into Ohio. U.S. Marshals were called in to assist. For days, the hunt spread across highways, motels, and backroads. And then, on September 1st, the fugitives were found. A budget motel on the outskirts of Dayton, Ohio. That was where Evelyn and Darren thought they could hide. When marshals moved in, the couple was taken without resistance. But inside their room lay damning evidence. Nearly $11,000 in cash, Evelyn's employment records, and, most chilling of all, the original Michigan lottery certificate, the very proof of Marcus's win. They hadn't just run. They had carried the prize like a trophy. Back in Michigan, the interrogations began. Evelyn's story was as predictable as it was pathetic. She repeated her old lie, that Marcus had left her, that he had taken the money and disappeared. But when investigators confronted her with the truth, that Marcus's body had been found, drugged and bound, her story shifted. Suddenly, she claimed Darren had masterminded it all, that she had been pressured, manipulated, too afraid to resist. Darren, meanwhile, invoked his right to remain silent in the first round of questioning. Later, he cracked. He admitted being involved, but pointed the finger right back at Evelyn. According to him, she was the one who drugged Marcus. She was the one who pushed the plan forward. He claimed he only thought they were going to scare Marcus, not kill him. Two liars. Two cowards. Each scrambling to save themselves. Each trying to paint the other as the true monster. But the evidence told the real story. Forensic testing revealed Evelyn's fingerprints on the bottle of sedatives. Darren's DNA was found on a work glove recovered near the disposal site. And the digital trail was undeniable. Text messages where Evelyn mapped out the timeline, confirmed she had the pills, and instructed Darren where to park. The case went to trial in September. Prosecutors laid it bare before the jury, a conspiracy born of greed. Evelyn and Darren had not stumbled into tragedy. They had planned it, coldly, deliberately, in pursuit of Marcus's lottery winnings. The defense flailed. Evelyn's attorneys painted her as a frightened woman under Darren's control. Darren's team claimed he was misled, dragged into something he didn't fully understand. But the jury wasn't fooled. For 5 hours they deliberated, weighing the mountain of evidence, the testimony, the sheer coldness of the crime. And when they returned, their verdict was unanimous: guilty. Guilty of first-degree murder. Guilty of conspiracy. Guilty of unlawful disposal of a body. Evelyn Hale was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The woman who once wept fake tears of joy over Marcus's lottery win would spend the rest of her life behind bars. No freedom, no escape, no happy ending with her lover. Darren Cross received 40 years, with parole eligibility after 30. By the time he ever sees freedom again, if he ever does, his life will be little more than shadows of what it could have been. And justice? Justice was served, but it was a bitter kind, because no sentence, no prison term, could bring Marcus back. The money he thought would save his life had instead stolen it. The courtroom fell silent as the verdicts were read, but for Marcus's family, there was no celebration. Only grief. Only the ache of knowing that his kindness, his hard work, his dreams had been betrayed by the woman he trusted most. Evelyn and Darren thought they had claimed the jackpot. In the end, all they won was prison walls and a lifetime branded as murderers. September 20th, 2018. With the guilty verdicts delivered and the sentences handed down, the story of Marcus Hale's murder finally reached its tragic conclusion. But for those who loved him, justice was a hollow victory. Marcus's funeral was held at Elmwood Cemetery in Detroit. Family members, co-workers, and neighbors gathered in mourning. They remembered a man who had worked himself to exhaustion, not for fame or fortune, but simply to provide, to survive, to give himself and his wife a modest life. His sister, Sheila, stood at the graveside, clutching a photocopy of the Michigan lottery confirmation letter. Through tears, she spoke of her brother's excitement, his belief that he was finally on the verge of turning his life around. She said softly, "He thought this was his chance to breathe again. And instead, it became the reason he was taken from us." The truth was brutal. Of the nearly $100,000 Marcus had won, about $45,000 had gone to paying off debts and loans, a responsible man's first priority. But the rest, nearly half of his winnings, was gone forever, lost in cash withdrawals, spent by Evelyn, or hidden away, never to be recovered. Investigators listed the remainder as unrecoverable assets. Think about that. All of Marcus's sacrifice, all his dreams, stolen not only from his hands, but from his family's as well. A man who finally found hope, betrayed by the very person who should have celebrated with him, should have stood by him, should have loved him. And for what? For greed, for lust, for the hollow promises of a woman who wanted more, and a man weak enough to help her take it. Today, Evelyn Hale will never see freedom again. Darren Cross will grow old behind bars. And Marcus rests beneath the earth, his life cut short not by chance, but by betrayal. This case is more than just a crime story. It's a warning, a reminder that sometimes the people closest to us can be the most dangerous. That love, when poisoned by greed, can transform into something monstrous. Marcus Hale thought he had finally won. But in truth, the only thing he won was a target on his back. And in the end, the jackpot went not to hope or happiness, but to lies, betrayal, and death.